Hello, friends, and welcome to Metaphysical Media with Stephen and Steve. I'm Stephen Lewis, and I have here my friend and colleague and partner in crime, Stephen Frampton. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing very well, thank you, Stephen. Very well.
Glad to hear that. Well, today we are going to showcase one of the most popular and powerful techniques in all astrology, the venerated horary technique. It's purely divinatory in its function, and it's the main tool that we astrologers use to answer questions. Natal astrology is certainly among the most difficult, and it certainly has its place, but when you have a question that's just sort of bugging at you and pestering you, Steve, and you have to have the answer to it right now, sometimes it's more appropriate to turn to horary. And what better tool than horary astrology to probe some of America's thorniest unsolved mysteries. So today we are going to talk about the disappearance and murder of the McStay family. And finally, rounding everything out, we'll talk about the Long Island serial killer. So we have an action-packed 2 hours here, Steve, quite fittingly close to Halloween. So we do have, with horary, of course, there's a chart cast for the time and place of the question. The time was back in several months ago, and the place was, for me, New Bern, North Carolina. But any of you, if you want, you can cast horary charts for any question you may have. What do you think about the technique, Steve?
I think that horary is a really interesting technique, and if a person is familiar with astrology, it's a great way of just getting a snapshot in time that will provide insight into the question being asked. So it's extremely useful, and I found that when I've used horary techniques to answer a question for a client or to provide insight into a situation for myself, it really does provide accurate insight. So it's a really great tool.
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing how much information it's capable of giving us. And we're going to use horary to tackle, again, two of the thorniest mysteries that are in the news today. And, let's take this for what it is. This is just, we're asking, for example, the identity of a person. In the case of the McStays, we obviously want to know who killed them and why that person killed them. So let's start with that chart, Steve, shall we?
Absolutely.
Okay. For those listening, if you'd like to cast a chart for yourselves, the reference chart we're using here, I pose this question on October the 9th, 2014 at 12:53 in the morning, 12:52 in the morning to be exact. And this was in New Bern, North Carolina in the United States. That should give you a chart that has Cancer rising, the latter degrees of Cancer. Now, William Lilly emphasized that the final 3 degrees of the ascendant, if the final 3 degrees of a sign rising, sort of invalidates the question or points to the faulty motive of the questioner, someone coming to test you with their question, someone who already knows the answer to their question, in fact. And I think there's some merit to this idea, mainly because what it shows, Steve, to have the final 3 degrees rising is the fact that, the situation is very late in the game. We've already, unfortunately, discovered the McStay family buried out in the desert. You know what I mean? So there's not much that the McStay family can be doing. Appropriately, Cancer rises, and at the planetary ruler of the hour that I asked a question was Jupiter, who is the exalted Lord of Cancer. So that is sort of like a checklist that we go through to sort of get the validity of the chart. Is this chart capable of giving me an accurate description of reality?
It's interesting as well that Cancer is the sign of the zodiac that rules families and the family unit, the family environments, and obviously it's extremely unusual for a whole family to go missing and for all members of that family unit to be found dead. So it's quite fascinating that the sign Cancer is on the ascendant in the charts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It couldn't be more pertinent, could it? I mean, it tells us right off the bat so much. First of all, it tells us that domestic issues are at the heart of this matter. It tells us, Cancer is a cardinal sign. So it tells us first and foremost that the entire saga that led up to their death was one that changed rapidly. Now, this isn't so much anything that we don't know. We know that they were subjected to great change, Steve, because the police encountered, for example, meals or food that was partially eaten and abandoned on the couch. Popcorn in little kiddie bowls just left there on the couch. A carton of eggs out on the counter and rotting. Very obvious.
They were there 1 minute, just living life, eating a meal, eating popcorn, and gone the next.
Yep. The next minute they are out of here, and this is shown by the cardinality of the ascendant and the descendant, for that matter, and the midheaven and the nadir. So all of the angles are cardinal. If a client were asking me about the stability of a marriage, I would be forced to tell this client, no way, no shape, no how. The overall situation is entirely too changeable. And so the moon is our main planetary significator. This represents the McStays as a unit, as mother, father, and two beautiful little boys. Individually, it's very interesting, to see that individually they are all arrayed in the fourth house, which is another house of death, because the fourth house in Horary is going to rule over the end of a matter, how the matter turns out. And it's going to give us information later when we get to that part of the analysis about the origins of this entire boondoggle. But here we see Mother Venus, Father, Sun, and the two little boys are signified by Mercury. So here we see them all buried, as it were, in the fifth house. This is almost a graphical representation of the McStay family's ultimate disposition, Steve.
It's fascinating as well that the ruler of the ascendant, the moon, is right up there at the midheaven. And also you've got Uranus at the midheaven there. Not too well, but actually it's relatively far from the moon, but it's still at the midheaven, and it is a really unusual, bizarre crime. So Uranus up there at the midheaven really reflects the fact that it's just downright odd. And then you've even got the south node of the moon up there at the midheaven, describing how sad this situation is.
Yeah, this moon, unfortunately, is in bad shape. So this chart is definitely telling the truth so far. There's no doubt about it. We can even see the relative health of the McStay's finances. Obviously, my first impulse when analyzing this chart, Steve, was I sort of homed in on the finance. I assumed first thing that this has to be some kind of dirty business. I noted, and I don't necessarily believe that anymore. We'll talk about my conclusions in a bit, but I looked at Jupiter in Leo conjunct the second house. Yeah, I'm like, wow. There's probably going to be, their finances were good relative to them. Their finances were good, but Jupiter rules the sixth house of low lives and the ninth house of foreigners. So right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, somehow he's doing business with bad people. Sometimes bad people, they progress very far in life due to their criminality, and they can afford indoor fountains, which was McStay's profession.
Well, do you know, Stephen, when I look at it, and I'm interested to see what you think of this, but I look at this chart, And I really feel the family theme very strongly, and that's partly described by the ascendant in Cancer, and the ruler of the ascendant, the moon, being up there at the south node, which is unfortunate, at the midheaven, what hits the headlines, what the public know about this situation. But it's interesting that you mentioned finances, because intuitively I feel very drawn to finances with this family and this situation. And then when you look at that Jupiter in Leo, which is right on the cusp of the house of finances, it's squaring Saturn, and Saturn's in the house of speculation, but it's also ruling the 7th house of open enemies and relationships. But then you've got this cluster of planets down there at the IC on the cusp of the 4th house of family, and I haven't quite reflected enough on the chart yet, but I feel like there's some kind of family involvement, and it's not just the fact that they died as a family unit, or that the whole family was affected. What do you feel that there could be some kind of family connection here to do with speculation?
Without doubt. Now, I will go ahead and clarify right off the bat that I don't think it was any of McStay's kin who did this. The brother did fall under suspicion, Michael did, because, for one thing, he waited a long time to report the disappearance. The house was allowed to be tromped in, essentially, for 2 days before the McStays were even officially reported missing. So this is fueled speculation that Michael could be involved. I, however, do not agree with that prognosis. I don't think he was in any way, shape, or form involved, and that's my astrological judgment of this chart. And it's also my personal opinion of the guy, listening to him talk. He's entirely too frank and open about the matter to be involved. But it is definitely a family matter, however, because, the origins of this situation are in Libra, the sign of one-to-one personal relationship. And so, quite frankly, now, first of all, let me just say that Saturn is a killer. Saturn is the 7th house ruler. Saturn is the dealer of death, ruling the 8th house.
Yeah.
Saturn is in the 5th house. Now, this was sort of misleading. The Jupiter and his questionable connections to the 6th house, that was a red herring for me. That misled me. What else? Oh, the 5th house. I also started tripping over the entrepreneurial character of the 5th house. You see, I thought 5th house, this is self-employment. This is private enterprise. And that turned out to be a red herring. Now, my judgment on the matter is that the 5th house dynamics involved here are those of children and sexuality. I'm thinking very much that who's responsible for this is going to be an ex-partner of Summer's. That's what I feel.
Let's look at partner
of Summer, the wives.
Sorry, of.
Right, I'm thinking that the perpetrator is an ex-partner of the wives, someone from the wife's past.
I think you're right. Actually, I couldn't catch what you were saying, but I think you're right, because that Saturn is ruling the house of relationships as well as the house of death. So it does imply that there's some kind of relationship involvement. And it is the moon that's very prominent in this chart. So I concur that it could well be some connection to the wife.
And moreover, I think Mr. McStay, Joseph, I think he mismanaged the situation. If we look at him as being the sun in Libra, the sun is at fall in Libra. When a planet's at fall, this is sort of the opposite of its exaltation. And when you're the exalted lord of the sign, then you're fully visible. But when you're at fall, you're sidelined. You know what I mean? The sun is definitely at fall.
It could indicate that the father was only involved in terms of the fact that he was affected by what happened. that he
Sure.
didn't, that the connection is not to the father, but more to the mother.
Oh, for sure. Venus representing the wife, Summer, she rules the sun. There's no doubt about that. The sun worships the ground that Venus walks on. He's totally besotted by Venus. However, his management of the situation, because this ex-partner would not have just come out of the woodwork. No. This ex-partner would be. There's going to be evidence of his interference in their life. There's going to be email evidence.
Actually, Stephen, something we didn't say that we should have said is that the fifth house is also the house of romance.
Oh, absolutely.
So
sexuality.
There's some kind of romantic connection.
Yeah, well, I definitely, what I'm willing to go on record as saying is that I believe that this ex had a sexual obsession with Summer. I'm not really going to actually say that there was an adultery or anything, because you know what? It takes two people to end a relationship. If I'm in a relationship with person B, I can end the relationship, but if person B decides that it ain't over, well, it ain't over. You know what I mean? Person B has all sorts of options available to her. So,
the mother has a lot of different names as well. She changed her name quite a number of times.
She has. She's definitely gone through an identity crisis of sorts, and I think that this is also a red herring on the case. One of the many factors that distract from the core element. It's just an unfortunate coincidence, and it's unfortunate in the sense that it injects a mysterious flare into a situation that's already so shadowy. Because, man, even with the horary chart, there's tons of questions. I mean, one thinks with the car being abandoned, this automatically, I think, led law enforcement and people in general to speculate multiple offenders, which leads one down the path of saying maybe it's a cartel thing, which, again, supports the red herring of the financial angle to this. But what I think is that the offender took control of the family by getting the kids first, subjugating the parents that way, forced them to drive, one of the parents to drive while he maintained control of one of the children in the back seat, took them to a location, murdered them, and then dropped off their vehicle. That's what I think. I think time is also going to tell ultimately. And again, this is really speculation guided from the symbolism of the chart here. Saturn
is Stephen, an exact square between, if you look at Pluto, Pluto in Capricorn in the sixth house is forming an exact square to Venus, which also implies some kind of romantic connection.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was
also that Venus is squaring, that Pluto is also squaring the Sun. But I read online that there was a suggestion that the wife had been poisoning the husband. And interestingly, when you look at the chart, you've got Neptune up in you've got Uranus ruling the 8th house of death, but we know it was really odd. And then you look at Uranus, it's opposing Venus and opposing the Sun, which again points to this romantic connection and how unfortunate that is for the husband. But then we've got Neptune in the 8th house as well. Neptune often associated with poisoning, and that Neptune is forming an aspect with and therefore interfering with the nodal axis.
Yes, I think the business partner advanced this theory. McStay's business partner in the interior fountain world. This guy is not beyond suspicion either. If it's not an ex-partner, I I tell you one thing, I mean, sure, the financial Jupiter and the financial aspects of the case may be a red herring, but I can't totally give up on them quite yet. You know, it's not beyond reason that the business partner might be involved in this. The seventh house is romantic partnerships, but it's also business partnerships.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
You know, I'm leaning more in favor of, you know, the personal relationship angle. That just.
Or could it be both? Could be both.
It certainly could. Stranger things have definitely happened. You know, Saturn in Scorpio. You know, Scorpio is famed for being jealous, famed for its vengeance, things of that nature. And Saturn.
One thing that's really intriguing, Stephen, is the part of fortune in this chart has the most dreadful aspect. When it squares the Sun, it's in conjunct Jupiter, square Uranus, conjunct Pluto. It's in the bends of the nodes, so it squares the nodal axis, it squares the midheaven. I mean, it's just that part of fortune describes how dreadful, how unfortunate this situation is. But that part of fortune is in the sign of business.
Yeah, you know,
in the sign of Capricorn in the sixth house.
Yeah, you know, the part of fortune is one of those things that just says how naturally lucky you're going to be, how you're going to benefit from just raw, blatant luck. You know what I mean? There is a certain wild card element to astrology. It's not 100% like deterministic all of the time. We acknowledge that there is a completely random element to fate, and the part of fortune signifies how you interact with that. And to have this part of fortune so afflicted is essentially it's like God took a big felt tip black marker and just like scribbled it out. You know what I mean? It's just like you're not going to benefit from it. There's not going to be any last minute reprieve. You know, no cavalry. You know.
The other thing, Stephen, is that the people think of the part of fortune as something that's always an indication of good fortune, and I see in my analyses, and it's confirmed in this case, as we're saying, that no, it's an indication of fortune, and it can be an indication of bad fortune as well as good fortune.
Right. Yeah.
Because it does describe these, it helps to describe these very unfortunate circumstances.
And is ruled by Saturn, who, whether it's a business associate of some sort or a romantic, or someone who's been rejected romantically, either or, it rules that terrible, terrible fortune. So, and it itself is ruled by Mars, and Mars in Sagittarius. The thing about this Mars, the ruling impulse of the murderer, is that, for one thing, it's not a bad Mars. It's not bad at all. I mean, it's peregrine, meaning it's just sort of wandering around. It has absolutely no dignity whatsoever. It's lost. You know, this is it's peregrine, right? But nevertheless, it's in House 5. This gives it some strength. It's direct. This gives it some strength, and it's swift in its motion. This also gives it a little extra strength. And, you know, so in other words, we have a picture of someone who is sort of chaotic and wandering, you know, apt to do or go anywhere. This is shown by Mars being peregrine. And yet, it's quite powerful and strong.
Mars is also ruling the moon in the south node. So it's also ruling the moon.
Yeah.
And it rules the south node of the moon, the point of self-undoing, and it's the ruler of Uranus. And so that Mars in Sagittarius, peregrine in Sagittarius, also ruling the moon, the south node, and Uranus in the midheaven, particularly combined with the fact that the moon is so heavily involved here, to me, again, it suggests a crime of passion.
Sure. And Mars, you know, aspects Aries and aspects of the moon. The moon is separating from a trine with Mars, which is very good for Mars, not quite so good for the moon, I would imagine. And for sure, Mars is in a good relationship to the sign that he rules, to his actions and to his deeds. So we have, the picture emerges of someone who has a lot of ability to do harm and has a certain animal cunning, and yet, again, is peregrine, isn't really rooted to any one community or the other. Certainly is going to have a spotty history as far as jail is concerned. You see, we have someone who's very adept at doing crime, and again, none of this is really prophetic. We could assume from the nature of what happened that whoever did this is a criminal, is someone with very finely honed criminal instincts. And it's a despicable human being, first of all. Whoever could kill those two little boys, man, I mean, I would not shed a tear if that person gets the death penalty when they find them.
No, not at all.
There's no room in society for somebody who's going to do something as despicable as that. And Saturn in Scorpio, this is a cold-hearted person, and we're going to see this theme emerge when we talk about the Long Island serial killer. I'm not really paying attention to the time here, so don't let me go overboard on time, Steve. But Saturn in Scorpio is going to be an important theme in both of these charts, and for good reason. I mean, I can't think of a gooier energy than that. Saturn in Scorpio. It's very difficult. Very difficult. This is someone who's extraordinarily jealous and for whom, violence is absolutely natural.
I've just placed some parts into the charts, all the Arabic parts. I chose the part of passion, part of fatality, part of discord, part of death, part of danger. I haven't analysed them yet, but I've got the information here. Do you want me to send you that chart as well?
Oh, sure. I've got some, talking about the Arabic parts for this particular chart. I have a list here as well. The testimony of the Arabic parts is also pretty grim. We have the part of life and Aries. That's always going to be difficult. Which parts did you say you were looking at? The part of passion?
Let's see here. Got the...
That was like a...
We've got the part of passion, part of fatality, part of discord, part of death, part of danger or peril.
Let's talk about the part of death, because that one is that's a very popular Arabic part that's been referenced throughout the literature. It's formulated by...
Look, it's exactly opposite that Saturn in the 5th house. This is to do with a romantic connection of some kind.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be difficult for the police to isolate this romantic connection either. There's going to be a definite record of it, because this person's not going to be capable of covering his tracks all that well. You know what I mean? Such a jealousy and rage, Steve, is going to be it's going to be impossible for there not to be a record of it. And indeed, I think the McStays were very frightened. I think they were frightened enough of this person to consider moving to Mexico. They did searches along those lines. Yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah, they did searches along those lines. They're quite spooked.
The part of death is conjunct that Mars in the 5th. And the part of fatality is in the 2nd house. It could well be that there's a financial issue as well. That there's some kind of financial connection.
Yeah, I thought that at first, and I haven't ruled it out personally. I haven't ruled it out. It's definitely going to become clear, and the cops are going to follow the money trail for whatever it's worth. I was suspicious about the 2nd house because of Jupiter ruling the 6th and the 9th. for some reason, I just felt those were unwholesome sources of income for.
But also you've got the sun is the ruler. It rules the cusp of the house of finances, and that sun is right at the right on the angle of the fourth house.
Yeah, absolutely. The ruler of the second house is angular, so definitely they would produce the finances. But you know something, I mean, the ruler is in bad shape by being in fall, so it's a sort of situation where the sun is going to produce finances and then destroy them later.
It's interesting, though, because I read that there was talk about financial difficulties and eviction.
Right.
So a former neighbour told the Daily Mail that the family was about to be evicted, and then they purchased a home for $230,000. And investigators, as well as family members, say that they can't find evidence of financial problems. So I wonder whether there could be some strange financial connection or arrangement with a previous partner. There's some financial and partnership connection, isn't there?
Yeah, we can't escape noticing also that Saturn, our main suspect in all of this, rules both the seventh house of partnership, business person, and also the eighth house of the partner's money as well. Yeah.
And the part of fortune and Pluto.
Yeah, those are very important rulerships. And so Saturn is representing, in addition to the murder, you know, it's almost like a synergy or an identification of the murderer with their money. So it's easy to see how one could say there's a lot of financial ill will and possible financial impropriety going on in this chart, or signified by this chart. The sun in fall, again, is going to be a sun that is not as organized as it should be, perhaps. It's going to be a sun that is countercultural and a bit, by countercultural, I mean eccentric, you see, odd. And again, sidelined, as it were. So there might be some resentments because of that coming from the sun. The sun was not, you can't, I mean, you take, this is why planets like Mars and the sun don't do well in Libra. Have you ever, you know what I'm saying? Have you ever tried shutting up somebody who is very solar or very martial? You know what I mean? You can't shut that person up, or you can't put them on the back burner. They're not going to have it. And if you do that to them, they're going to act out or do something radical to get attention. Or, you know, the sun wants to obviously be the sun, and in the sign of his fall, he's ignored. There's something about him that's ignored. And or there's some aspect of his Libran existence, and Venus ruling Libra is a natural significator for finances. Libra is a natural sort of a match for the one-to-one business transaction. You know, sun in that sign could indicate, you know, a mismanagement of that sort of thing. You know, so the sun's capable and will definitely contribute to the finances, but it's going to hurt those finances later because it's in fall. You know, that's the story being told by this chart anyway. Now, all of that stuff may just be, you know, unfortunately tangential, you know, unnecessary, or just, you know, it might just be coincidental, you know, in other words. And it might not. Of course, it might not. You know, only time will tell. And in horary, you know, what's going to happen next, these are signified by the applying aspect. You know, so we're looking for, obviously, applying aspects to the bad guy, Saturn, whom we've isolated as being the murderer here, our main suspect. And we do actually have an applying aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. At the time of this chart, that aspect was going to perfect in 4 degrees and 2 minutes. Jupiter here is angular and fixed. You know, so the timing of the horary issue is not 100%. Every authority and master of this art will be quick to tell you that. Timing is tricky, but, you know, and Jupiter, we would consider him more succeedent than angular. So, you know, 4 time units fixed sign in a succeeding house, 4 years is definitely not unreasonable. You know what I'm saying? That's commonsensical. The cops aren't going to rush on this sort of a thing. I interpret the incoming square of Jupiter to Saturn as being the arrest of the suspect. Jupiter here in his guise as universal significator of the law. He's fixed. The authorities are definitely not going to give up on this one. They're going to get this guy. That's the way I'm seeing it. They're going to arrest someone. And I see that symbolized by the square. And if they make an arrest on this, you better believe, I'm pretty sure they're going to get a conviction, because they're probably going to have a very carefully crafted case. If there's going to be forensic evidence and not, a minimum of circumstantial evidence, is going to be the kind of stuff that juries like. They're going to take their time assembling it too. So it's a very, very sad case one way or the other, Steve. In a very real way, those two poor kids, when you're a kid, you have to do what your parents tell you. Their fates are in the parents' hands, and I got to tell you, it looks like, with the sun in fall here, it looks like some bad decisions were made, regardless of whether the roots of this crime are in financial hanky-panky, or whether the roots of the crime, as I believe, are dealing in relationship matters. Either way you cut it.
The involvement of Merritt, this guy Charles Ray Merritt, he was nicknamed Chase. He's potentially involved, and also he's an ex-con. I wonder if he's involved somehow. Yeah, we can't rule him out from this horary either, quite frankly, because Capricorn is on the cusp of the seventh. The nature of the seventh house is partnership, be that a business partnership or personal. So unfortunately, the house symbolism doesn't narrow it down enough for us. In which case, we can certainly turn to the dignities here. Saturn is ruled by Mars, and he's in the term of Jupiter. So the term rulership of Saturn might specify the area of management that Saturn's trying to accomplish here. Saturn's ruled by Mars, so that means Mars is managing Saturn. It might be wrong to think of these rulerships in terms of a king bossing around his subjects. It's more appropriate to think of it in terms of a manager in an office, or an estate manager. The person who is the planetary energy that runs the practical daily affairs of that sign. And that's Mars. Mars is the executive administrative officer in charge of Scorpio and in charge of Saturn, and also in charge of the two boys. Apparently the two boys were they weren't accidental victims here. They were definitely targets. They figured prominently in the murderer's plan to begin with, which in itself argues for a solitary killer, quite frankly. Because if you're thinking, I've got to get hold of the children first to manage the parents, then you don't have a partner to hold a weapon on the parents. You know what I mean, Steve? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just you. I have to manage the situation by myself. The easiest, quickest, best way to do that is to get those two kids. And indeed, Mercury, universal significator of children, is in Scorpio. I would argue that Mercury here serves as a solitary significator for both of those little boys. That's what I would argue.
Some of McStay's natal chart is available, actually.
Really? Summers, with their birth time.
Let's see, I'm trying to find out, but I'd read online that it was available. Let me see.
Because I don't have any nativities for any of the McStay. Obviously, if you have the nativity of the questioner, or if you have a natal root to analyze along with the horary, this is ideal. This is good.
Here we go. She was born in San Gabriel County, California, December 27th, 66. Time of birth unknown. And the father's nativity is available as well, Joseph McStay. His nativity is available as well. And it looks like the kids' nativities are available.
Do any of these have birth time?
No birth time for Gianni. Let's see. No birth time for Joseph either.
Yeah. Unfortunately, every last one of those nativities would have to be rectified before they'd be of any use at all to us, because we don't know where the horoscopos is. We don't know how to delimit the infinity of the circle. We don't know where our starting point is. We lack an ascendant, unfortunately.
Apparently, though, people that have analysed the individual's chart concluded that that there was an enormous amount of trauma for the family. So it's certainly not something that happened quickly for them.
Yeah,
it's not as though they were removed and killed quickly. There's a huge amount of disruption and trauma for the four of them.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially if there is, someone from Summer's past, an ex-boyfriend who doesn't want to let go. Especially if that person is stalking them or emailing them constantly. You know what I mean?
She was very attractive. She was a very attractive girl.
Oh, sure. The whole family was an attractive family. That's one thing that I think really stuck in my craw, because there's something quintessentially American about them. There's something that's archetypally American about them. And the fact that someone would kill them, I find to be highly offensive. Highly offensive. And, I would love to see the right person prosecuted for the crime. Now, by the same token, it wasn't difficult for me to analyze this chart rationally, objectively, without any subjective bias, because that's just my nature. I'm a passionate person, but I'm also kind of cold-hearted and curious when it comes to intellectual matters, as I am here.
See, it's interesting. Actually, I was going to say, no, this doesn't count, but I'll say it because it is. It's really important learning for people that are listening. If people are learning about astrology, when I ran actually, this is correct. If you take Summer's chart, her natal chart, and again, we don't know the time she was born. So we don't know the phasing of the houses, but we've still got the positioning of the planets. But if you take Summer's chart and then you overlay the Horary chart, the part of fortune in the Horary chart is right on top of Venus in Summer's chart, and not only that, but Venus in the Horary chart is conjunct Mars in her natal chart, and the Sun in the Horary chart is conjunct her. Well, it's conjunct her part of fortune. Well, we have to ignore her part of fortune because we don't know her time of birth. But the conjunction of the Horary part of fortune to her natal Venus and of the Venus in the Horary chart to her Mars, again, that suggests romantic involvement.
It definitely singles her out a little bit, doesn't it? It does. And people sort of instinctively gravitated toward the idea that Summer might be involved. One person actually was irresponsible enough to author an entire book on the matter while the McStays were still missing. He was forced into the embarrassing situation of offering a refund to all of those who purchased the book prior to their discovery out in the desert. And in his book, he advanced all sorts of wild and presumably idiotic theories. Now I've got no problem with spouting idiotic theories as long as you're doing it in a brainstorming session, with your notepad. If a lofty venue such as published material, that's not the appropriate venue to spout that sort sort of gibberish. The family had not even been found yet. And, that book came down quite heavily on Summer, quite interestingly enough. And people automatically suspected Summer. She changed her name. She's eccentric. She's a weirdo. I think it's her personality that introduced this monster into the family's existence. I don't think Summer's personality was bad, but I think that her lifestyle and her personality was such that it permitted a jilted ex to graft itself to the McStay family, to develop probably some sick, twisted friendship with them, and ultimately to kill them.
That's what I'm feeling. I think your cautionary comments are important, because the bottom line here is nobody, well, the killer knows, but apart from the killer, quite probably nobody knows exactly what occurred here. And, we're speculating, we're using astrology to provide insight, but we can't say for sure we know what's going on. But
Absolutely.
I tell you what, her natal chart is very interesting. And again, we don't know the time of birth, but she's got a pretty much an exact opposition between the moon and the sun in her chart. And let me see what else we've got here. Saturn opposition Uranus. Let's look at all of the aspects in her charts, because she's a complex character. And she's got a very complex moon, in other words, emotional state and reactions. So the moon, in my mind, is a very important indicator of what a person's mental state, emotional state. So I'm not saying that she was mentally ill, but I am saying that the moon in her chart is very complex, and the sun, which is men in her life, that's complicated as well. And you look at her natal chart and you think, well, actually, she's quite a complex character. Mercury is another factor we consider in mental health. Her Mercury is in Sagittarius. It's in the later degrees of Sagittarius, and that's quite challenging. To have Mercury in the later degrees of a fire sign, I think, is a challenge, particularly when it's the mutable fire sign. And then when you look at the aspects, her Mercury is squared by Uranus, it's squared by Saturn, it's squared by Pluto, it's squared by Chiron, and it's quintile Mars. It doesn't have a connection to the moon. Something's not right here in her chart. And I was just looking at her natal chart. There's something quite strange about it.
Well, it sounds to me like she was born at the full moon, and if her moon is if her moon is separating from that opposition, then hers would be a provincial birth, meaning the moon then would be losing its light and growing colder. And the general pattern of such a life is that it becomes more and more unfortunate as time goes on. It becomes more and more difficult as time goes on. Whereas with the opposite pattern, in other words, if the moon is applying to the opposition with the sun, it would be completely the reverse. It would be a situation where, the bigger achievements and the bigger problems would seem to happen before middle age, which, she lied about her age. She subtracted justifiably 10 years off of her age. But that shows she's obviously not above lying. And this is what bothers people, I think, about Summer. You change your name, you know what I mean? That's kind of shady. It's kind of deceptive. Her Mercury that you commented on it's in the sign of its detriment. It's technically debilitated in Sagittarius. Now, debilitated doesn't necessarily mean it's a weak Mercury. I don't know. I would expect with such a Mercury that she would be quite sharp-tongued and quite sharp.
She's got very challenging aspects between Mercury and the other parts of herself, the psyche. I mean, her Venus let's see, is in Capricorn, and it's got 3 trines: Pluto, North Node, Uranus. So.
Where are Mars and Saturn?
Sorry.
What's Mars and Saturn's position in her nativity?
Her Mars is in 12 degrees Libra, and Mars is squaring the Sun, squaring the Moon, quintile Mercury, quintile Jupiter. If I was giving input to the police on this, I'd be saying do a full and a very thorough check on any previous relationship connections to summer.
Well, yeah, definitely with Mars in Venus's sign and Venus in the sign of Mars's exaltation, both of these cardinal signs, I would expect that history to be rather densely populated. And what's Saturn's position, and what sign is he in?
Her Saturn is in Pisces, with an almost exact opposition to Uranus.
Wow.
And it is that Saturn that rules her Venus, because her Venus is in Capricorn.
So now I think this puts into clearer context in the horary chart the status of the Sun at fall, sideline. I could imagine being married to such an eccentric personality. You know what I mean? How are you going to exert authority over her? How are you going to, for example, take your business in the direction that you yourself want to go in? What if she wants to take it in another direction? You know what I mean? This is a very strong-willed individual, Summer is. And, I suppose we need to question whether Mr. McStay was up to the task of being married to her in a way that would allow him to have a healthy ego. Because I'm thinking that once the interventions of the murderer come in, with the emails, maybe, who knows, maybe even things as inappropriate as visits, this person is definitely going to have crossed lines in that regard. You know what I mean? Instead of, look at their reaction. I think they wanted to flee to Mexico to escape this. I don't know why they didn't involve the police. That's the
father's got an interesting chart as well, though. The father's got what I would describe as a pretty complex chart. He's got the Sun at 28 degrees Scorpio, conjunct Neptune, also at 28 degrees Scorpio, conjunct Mercury at 0 degrees Sag. It would be fascinating to know their times of birth and to be able to really analyze the whole thing.
Yeah, with Mercury conjunct the Sun in this gentleman's chart, that's going to be a big strike against any effective communication in interpersonal relationships. You know what I mean? It's going to make it more difficult. So, yeah, they would have had problems communicating. I think Mr. McStay would have had problems asserting his self-identity in that relationship, and I think the person who murdered them probably exploited that somehow in the years or months leading up to the disappearance of the family. And I think the cops are going to close in on this, and I think they're going to arrest a suspect, and time will tell what will happen. I also think that we might as well not get impatient about this, because it's going to take a while. I'm thinking it might take years before we get an ultimate resolution to this matter, Steve. What do you say we look at the second horary figure that we have before us? How are we doing on time anyway, Steve?
I think we're good. I think we're good to move on. It's just it's a little frustrating because there's, again, if we had the times of birth for the members of the family, and we had enough time, I think we could provide a huge amount of insight into what happened here. Because it would be interesting to look at the mother and father's relationship, to progress their charts, to the time of their disappearance, see what was going on in their relationship at that time. And then there are so many variables that could be pulled into this that you could almost solve the crime, I think, by pulling it all together and doing enough analysis, especially if there were suspects. If there are people that the police suspect, and if you pulled their charts into it, you could pretty much solve the crime, I think.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I could rectify all of those charts. Mother, father, and 2 children. There's a definite process to it. And what you're essentially doing is retro-engineering a birth time based upon known events that have happened. And there's a procedure for doing it. It's time-consuming. It's expensive. But it works. What you arrive at is the astrological birth of that person. And it'll be more precise than what would be found on a birth certificate, quite frankly. So, yeah, if that had to be done, that can be done. Such a project would be time-consuming, though. It really would be time-consuming. The horary, and this is a good thing about horary, is that it encompasses a situation in its totality. It tells us everything about the situation. It leaves nothing out. If they're going to be interposers, if they're going to be interlopers, if they're going to be, all parties involved in their contribution to the resolution of the matter at hand, all of that shown by the horary chart. Their relation to each other, their opinions of each other, all of that is detailed by the horary. We have a resolution to this chart. And in my opinion, I could be wrong about this, in my opinion, it's epitomized by the square of Jupiter to Saturn. Jupiter applying to square Saturn.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah, it is. And also Mars is applying, or separating rather, from a trine of Jupiter. So never mind. That's a separating aspect, and it's a fairly recent one. And I'm hoping that it would represent some sort of a blunder on the part of the killer, and we can safely assume that this person probably did leave a blunder. If you're brash enough to murder an entire family and bury them in the desert, then you're stupid enough to overlook something.
Somebody's got to know something. I laugh though when I look at you. Whenever I look at the horary charts that you pull, they're always sort of after midnight or in the afternoon. I always laugh and say, I don't think a lot of work gets done in Stephen's office in the morning.
Oh no, those two do happen to be at night. I am both a night owl and an early bird, so I don't know why we have to compare stages of wakefulness to birds, but I've pretty much got the entire day covered in terms of wakefulness. My sleep patterns could probably they're probably very crazy. I'm kind of like Kramer from Seinfeld. I sleep 4 hours at a time here, then another 4 hours there. It's probably terrible.
Mine was strange until I got a puppy. that wakes up at 8 a.m. So you have to be up and dealing with him, walking him, wearing him out. And if you don't keep him to his routine, then he won't go to bed at 10, 11 o'clock. And so I've learned there needs to be a routine. I'm learning that lesson at the moment.
Maybe I need to get a Labrador puppy so I can I learn that lesson as well. I love being able to go to bed at a normal time and wake up at a normal time as well, but unfortunately that's not in the cards for me.
Well, it wasn't for me until I got a puppy. We'll have to get you a Labrador.
Yeah, they're very rambunctious and energetic, aren't they?
Yeah, very, very loving, but full of energy, and you really have to consume that energy. You need to wear them out, and then they'll get all loving and want to sleep. But if you don't exercise him, he's full of it. And you can't really get him when he's full of it because he just won't calm down.
Oh wow! See there, he's like the sun in Libra. He's been sidelined, and he's not going to have it. See, we'll compare that sun in Libra in the McStay chart to the sun in Leo for our next for our next great loser.
Oh yes, how interesting that a serial killer the serial killer is described by a son in Leo. Yes, well let's move on then and look at this Long Island serial killer. It's dreadful, isn't it, to know that there are active serial killers out there. I can't remember the statistics, Stephen, but then they say there were something like 40 or 50 serial killers out there in the U.S. at any point in time.
Oh man, the number's closer to a couple hundred, Steve.
Is it really? It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah, several of them have been caught here recently, and they've been redefining the complete conception of what serial killers do and how they behave. It used to be the doctrine of the behavioral scientists that serial killers didn't cross racial lines, and this has been violated on a couple of notable occasions, although it usually still holds true. There was, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, they used to say that people of different ethnic groups other than whites, these ethnic groups, they don't produce serial killers. Far from the truth. There have been African American, Latino, Asian serial killers, etc. So the entire phenomenon is one that's not going to go away due to the nature of it. And you know what? I don't think America wants it to go away, quite frankly. America loves and needs its serial killers, so much so that they finagled somehow for there to be a television show where a serial killer is a good guy. I've never understood that. Very popular show, Dexter, I'm talking about. I've never watched it. I'm sure it's entertaining. I'm sure it's high quality. But I'm never going to watch it because serial killers, to me, are pieces of dung.
Stephen, I watched a documentary. I stumbled across a documentary. I think it was one of the things that came up on my YouTube recommendations about a British lady in Victorian times that killed hundreds of babies.
The midwife, yeah. Well, she was a foster baby purchaser.
Well, she was. They had what they called baby farms, and people would give up babies, and they would pay an amount of money for the baby to be taken care of. So if you had a child, an illegitimate child, or a child that you weren't able to take care of, then you would pay, and in effect, I think most people thought that they were paying so that the child would be taken care of, so it was like an adoption fee.
Yeah, she'd get £5 per head.
Yeah, so she would take the babies, hundreds and hundreds of them. She was doing it for years and years, and apparently she'd said that sometimes she was taking one baby a day. And she was taking the money, the adoption fee, and the parents would think, the mother would think, well, this child is going to be adopted or taken care of at least, and she would just kill the babies. It was absolutely hideous, absolutely hideous. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and it would be interesting to do a review of her astrology, although I'm pretty sure the time would not be available, but perhaps the date would be. But they're obviously extreme cases, or extreme cases of the psyche gone wrong and of human behavior, possible human behavior, but they do make excellent case studies astrologically because you really are able to break down, analyze the psyche of any person astrologically.
Yeah, that's the challenge here with this horary chart. First of all, I think the example you cited of the baby farmer, she's a very good example to cite because, a lot of times we think serial killer and we think sexual dysfunction. But no, what makes a serial killer is the serial nature of their crimes. Here, this lady was killing babies for a criminal enterprise, and nevertheless, she was indeed a serial killer because her homicides were serialized one after the other. So that's a very good distinction to make.
Can you imagine? Is there anything worse than killing babies and doing it for money? I mean,
yeah, but as low as you get.
Everybody with less conscience.
Yeah, I got to admit that's about as low as it can possibly go. You have to have a heart of stone to do that to a little baby. And, you know, she got paid for it. Oh, my God. And then her day...
Way of making money, basically. She gave away her own daughter to a baby farm.
She gave away her own daughter?
She had a daughter, and she got sick of the daughter and gave the daughter away to her, sold the daughter to her, or gave the daughter to a baby farm or something. And that's when she got the idea. She was obviously thinking, well, I got rid of my daughter, great. And then she realized that there was money involved, and she thought, well, I could make money this way. And just pure evil. But anyway, I digress. Let's look at this serial killer. So this is an active serial killer.
He's very active. Absolutely. He's been active since at least the late 90s. Okay. Since at least he's targeted sex workers mostly. And, you know, he's been using Nassau County, Gilgo Beach, etc. He's been using that area in New York's Long Island as his own personal cemetery now for a long time. Police have found the remains of 10 human beings there. And this is a very good example of someone who might cross boundaries, because there's also a transvestite male, Asian male out there, so he differs not only in ethnicity from the other victims, but also in gender. Now, this could be either a mistake on the serial killer may have thought that the individual was legitimately female and then killed him anyway, or, as some people suggest, we could have multiple serial killers using this as a dumping ground. I'm not ready to rule that out entirely yet, Steve, because of the mutable nature of the ascendant here, and indeed of all the angles. Contrast that to the McStay chart, which had cardinal signs on all of the angles. Here we have the mutable signs on the angles, specifically mutable fire rising. Mm-hmm. And one I guess difficulty you might say I had in approaching this chart was determining how to interpret it, because my inquiry is to understand the personality of the offender, the unsub, which is cop talk for unidentified subject. I wanted to know about
just to be clear for our listeners, the question you were asking when you ran this chart originally was, what is the Long Island serial killer like?
Right.
Exactly. Give us insight into this person or people.
Right. So, I think about that now, Steve, and I'm like, oh my God, maybe I worded the question wrongly, because it's not really asking the chart. I'm not asking of the chart to give me a specific answer. I'm not asking for his identity, for example. I'm not asking to really know all that much about the victims, for example. I centered my inquiry around understanding the offender himself. And we do have Sagittarius rising. So right off the bat, with a fire sign rising, we're going to be looking at an individual who is all about wielding influence and authority over people. Doesn't mean he's necessarily good at it, but this is what he wants more than anything. This is his ascendant. And with the ascendant ruler, Jupiter, in the ninth house, we have the ascendant ruler, Cadent. So it tells me that this individual has a hard time wielding influence and exerting authority over people. He can only do so properly about 25% of the time. So this right there speaks a lot towards the motive of the individual.
You also got Mercury, rational mind or irrational mind, in this case, later degrees of fire sign as well, receiving the energy of the sun, because the sun's at 19 degrees Leo. But the only other aspect of this Mercury is a sesqui square aspect to Pluto, planet of crime. So it's not what you would call a good Mercury by any means. And the moon, in this case, the moon is in conjunct the sun. So there's a tension between the sun and the moon. And then the moon is sesqui square Jupiter, which is ruling the ascendant, and it's also embedded in the house of death. And it's trine Saturn, so it's collaborating with Saturn in Scorpio in the 12th house. I think that Saturn in Scorpio in the 12th house says a lot, because I always feel that Scorpio's a pretty nasty place for Saturn to be. I feel like Saturn's really nasty in Scorpio.
Saturn's really nasty just about everywhere.
Yeah,
Saturn.
Particularly, I find Scorpio, and I'm not saying that Scorpio is a bad sign of the zodiac, and to the contrary, a lot of people have a very negative understanding of Scorpio. You hear a lot of people say, "Oh, she's a Scorpio. Oh, that's bad." And Scorpio, like any other sign of the zodiac, has its positive and its negative qualities. Not good or bad in itself, but when you interpret a chart in full and you see factors like Saturn in Scorpio combined with other things, it can be problematic. And I certainly think that Saturn can be very nasty, very sneaky, very much seeking power in Scorpio, and very sexual as well. It's almost like, I think if there was a configuration, or if you had to choose a planet under a sign of the zodiac to describe something like sadism, I'd probably choose Saturn and Scorpio to describe that. Not nice.
No, it's not nice. I agree with your comments about Saturn's placement in Scorpio. It's difficult because of what rules Scorpio, what manages Scorpio, namely Mars. So in other words, anytime you have a Saturn manifestation, you're going to have a Mars manifestation. The Saturn experience is going to lead to Mars, and vice versa. So it's the linkage between these two malefic planets that makes it so hard to deal with. Now, a lot depends upon Mars's condition. If Mars is in good condition, then Saturn's going to be in good condition. This Mars is not, because it's in the 12th house. This automatically makes the Mars bad. And Mars here is ruling, in addition to ruling the 12th of this serial killer's mistakes and hidden things and vices, it also rules the 5th house. So this is definitely a serial killer who he's performing lust murders, is what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's distinct
that Mars is in Scorpio as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, this guy's, and now I'm inclined to think this is going to be a churchgoer, because
Stephen, really funny you say that, because when I looked at this chart, and I mean when I glanced at it without looking at the detail in it, so just my first energetic feeling was church and education.
Yes.
And as you were talking, I thought, I wonder if this could be a teacher or somebody that is involved in a church. It's really interesting that you say that.
Well, with the ascendant in Sagittarius, with Jupiter's sign rising, this could run the gamut from a teacher, a religious cleric, a police officer, a lawyer, a professor. Now, I'm inclined to think not so lofty as these things, because the professional indications of this chart are more humble than that, I'm thinking.
Well, Mercury is ruling the midheaven, and
right. Mercury has professional importance in this chart. So that, mercurial professions are those that measure. An accountant, maybe, a low-level accountant, maybe. In the sign of Leo, perhaps even something like a script writer of some sort, or, some other mercurial profession like surveying or what have you. But with the ascendant ruler in the 9th house of God, I would expect this person to go to church at some point. He might be a church goer, a synagogue goer, a mosque goer, something of that nature. And I would expect him to be practicing the same religion he was born into, with the fixed sign of Leo on the 9th house. This is not going to be somebody who would probably switch religions or convert to something else. I'm thinking, could be wrong about that. Thinking the guy's, probably a Christian due to the ascendant and the ascendant placement, but I also could be wrong about that. I'm open-minded about that. Jupiter is under the sunbeams, So his essentially criminal nature is well hidden in the church. And this wouldn't be the first time we see this. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, he was an avid church. He was a deacon in his church, you see. So this wouldn't be the first time that we've seen a pattern like this. You know what I mean, Steve?
Mm-hmm.
Now, his irrational mind is perhaps better shown by the moon, which traditional astrology splits the mind into the rational mind shown by Mercury and the irrational mind shown by the moon. And we notice automatically that the rational mind, the mercurial mind, is fixed and fiery and masculine, and the irrational mind is mutable, cold, wet, feminine, passive. So I've found that mutability in general is perhaps a hallmark of serial killers. I've found that malefics oftentimes rule and or occupy the 12th house with serial killers, which is the case here. You often find an emphasized 8th house, which is the case here as well. We have the part of fortune in the 8th house. This guy's going to be keeping mementos. Whenever the cops catch up with him, they're going to find driver's licenses, they're going to find earrings, they're going to find panties, things like that.
There's also a lot of fixed energy in this chart, 48.5% fixed, which indicates a real addictive behavior, doesn't it? And obviously, serial killers are addicted to what they're doing.
Yeah,
it's also a very fiery chart, 44.7% fire, with a good strong dose of Scorpio and Pisces. Saturn is very strong in this chart.
Without doubt. The 12th house nature of the chart is definitely indicating an addiction, a vice of some sort, the fixity of the 12th house. Scorpio is, of course, a fixed sign. This is one cause of its ill effects. The fixity of the water element it can be bad. And so definitely to have a fixed water sign on the 12th house, because that speaks to addictions. And these would be sexual addictions. These would be sexual vices. Now, this person is aging as well. We have to keep in mind this is not his nativity. You see, this is not his nativity. This is a horary chart that's sort of, serving as a surrogate nativity, as it were. And yet, I think it is a valuable chart in extrapolating information about this person, and I think that it could be useful. I think it really could be useful. We see multiple indications for a preference for prostitutes and low-class women. The part of the religion and honesty of woman is associated with the 5th house here in Aries. That's not good. And now it's worth looking into his partnership and his marriages, Steve, because this is going to factor into his behavioral profile that's going to emerge out of Quantico. And with Gemini on the 7th house cusp, we're looking at an unsub who has been married at least twice. This guy's been married before. If he's married now, and he probably is, then this will be his second wife, more than likely. And she's signified by Mercury in Leo, and she's also just naturally signified by the moon and Venus, because these are natural significators of wives. And we might even go so far as to say that she's more signified by Venus than the moon, because this is a diurnal chart, a day chart. And Venus is probably more appropriate for the romantic other of a male during the day. But so I think it's very important to note that the guy probably is married, and his wife will be aware that something's wrong with the guy, A, and B, she is going to be rather insipid to him sexually. You know what I mean? This is going to be a guy who's going to want to, hurt his victim. Okay, he's going to require something out of his victim, immobility perhaps, or some sort of, he might have a read from a script. This is something that his wife can't do. He can't. It could be very well could be the case that he asked his wife for this for this, this kinky thing in bed. Hey, can you just lay there and be still? Or can you do this, or can you do that? Can you pretend you're dead? Or can you say this, that, or the other? So this this is going to be the sort of guy we're dealing with here, and his wife probably would have rejected that.
Hopefully.
But she'll be aware of it. I'm thinking she'll definitely be aware of it. And this is going to be a signature that the guy is going to want to experience with all of his victims.
It's funny that the part of passion in this chart, which is at 25 degrees Aquarius, it's in the third house of mentality. And notice that in this chart, you've got a huge amount of water in the third house, and the third house in water can be problematic.
Well, I would say that. I'm sorry.
Sorry, but I was looking at the fact that the part of passion is ruled by Uranus at 16 degrees Aries, and that Uranus forms an inconjunct but problematic aspect to Saturn and Scorpio in the 12th. So I think you're right about and I haven't read about the actual victims. I'll have a look in a moment, but certainly that part of passion ruled by Uranus in Aries, retrograde, in conjunct Saturn, Scorpio in the 12th house, it certainly describes some very sick sexual preferences or interests, doesn't it?
It not only describes the pathology of this man's sexuality, it also describes the location of the dump site. Aquarius has long been associated with water. You might even say that Aquarius is the fourth water sign. Its symbol, its astrological glyph is reminiscent of waves. And even as far back as Manilius, going back into the years before the Common Era, we have Aquarius always being associated with water, but not just any water. This isn't water like Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio is. This isn't pure elemental water. This is engineered water. These are canals, docks, harbors, ports, things of that nature. And the dumping ground for these prostitutes is an island, a place that has been engineered to the nth degree to coexist with water. You see, so for sure it describes the location, and it describes the method of picking up the prostitutes, which would be through third house methods. It could be, just driving around, but it's going to be more like email communications and texts and things of that nature. And indeed, we know about these victims. They conducted their trade via Craigslist. So this is all very, very appropriate in terms of the reality that we know, him soliciting victims from Craigslist, the dump site being near water, the ruler of Aquarius, Saturn, being in the 12th house of vices, assembled with Mars, ruling the sexuality. So it's very easy to see the sort of doomed erotic impulses that this man has, very compelling ones.
A toddler was discovered as well.
I'm sorry?
A toddler was discovered that was found dead in the same location on this Gilgo Beach.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? And I think that I don't know why that prostitute would carry her child with her, but I'm assuming that the kid must have been accompanying her mother. And unfortunately, I think killing the kid must have been what the serial killer would have considered a necessity. I don't think he would have derived any pleasure from that. That was just to cover his butt. He couldn't leave witnesses, and I suppose he could have chosen another victim, but for people like this, it's not easy to find the right victim sometimes. Who knows how many prostitutes he's hired, transacted his business with, and just let go. The victim's going to have to adhere to a very specific mode and model. And this is shown by the 7th house. The victim is going to be mercurial in some way. She's going to be like Mercury in Leo, as a matter of fact. And you know what? I'm inclined to think in this regard she might actually serve as a surrogate for the wife herself, because the 7th house is the house of wives as much as it is the house of business partners. And here his victims are business partners. And so Mercury in Leo is a very good symbol for his victims and also for his wife, which is very interesting. Now, Gemini on the 7th house cusp shows business women who are business savvy. Mercury in Leo is probably going to have a certain communication style that's fixed. Maybe it refers to a woman of a certain intellectual class. Who knows? But that Mercury in Leo is going to identify the victim in the sense of this is what the killer needs in order to be aroused to kill. Certainly there will have been many women who have come across this man and have lived to tell the tale. There may even be women that he's assaulted and who escaped. For sure, this man will have some sort of a record, no matter his level in society, which, judging from the rank of fame in this chart, is not so bad. This guy, he would have a little bit of clout. Not much, but some. And
you know what? Do you know, Stephen, sorry to interrupt you, but when we were talking about Sagittarius and the professions ruled by Sagittarius, and we said, well, clergy, could be education, and could be law enforcement. Well, it does say online that one theory is that he does have ties to law enforcement, because he seems to have a very good understanding of law enforcement techniques. Well, I can't hear you now, Stephen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can. Yes.
I'm thinking more along the lines of law enforcement enthusiasts. Looking at the mercurial midheaven, the man's, this offender's deeds, his reputation will be a bit nerdy. He'll have a reputation for being bookish, intellectual, passive, because this 10th house, this midheaven, is in Virgo, a passive, earthy, feminine sign. Analytical. He'll have a reputation for that, and these will be his deeds, regardless of his job. Even if he's spreading asphalt out on the highway, he's going to be an analytical person, and he's going to have a reputation for being analytical, almost to the degree of being a nag. You see, and quite frankly, he could be doing this. He could be a professional analyst, such as an accountant or something. But I would also expect some difficulties in the career because the ruler of the midheaven is in aversion to the midheaven in Leo. Mercury does not aspect his sign of Virgo. You know what I'm saying? It's like Mercury doesn't see the planetary principle that manages his reputation and his career isn't able to see it. And this is bad, so this would translate it. I would expect there to be a spotty work history for this guy. Being fired, leaving under shady conditions, interpersonal problems at work, things of that nature, Steve.
What causes you to say that?
Because the fact that the ruler of the midheaven is in aversion to the midheaven.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. We don't count the semi-sextile as an aspect in traditional astrology, nor the quincunx. But, in modern astrology, they use them quite a bit. And I'm not necessarily against their usage. However, the rather negative nature of the semi-sextile and the quincunx stems from the fact that the houses referred to by these degree aspects are in aversion to each other. You know what I'm saying? The first house is in quincunx aspect to the 6th house. They're in aversion to each other. The first house is in semi-sextile to the second. They're in aversion to each other. So all of the aspects are actually derived from the placements of the houses from each other. This is the basis of the aspects. And it's all very logical. The traditional astrology is extraordinarily logical. You give the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, their signs to rule. Cancer and Leo. They come one right after the other. And then sort of fanning out from those, we have Gemini and Virgo belonging to Mercury. Then fanning out more, we have Taurus and Libra belonging to Venus. And this forms a semi-sextile degree aspect, right? And from this, we get the notion that the semi-sextile is Venusian in character. So fanning out some more, we have Aries and Scorpio. So this is the square. These are Mars's signs. And the square has the nature of Mars. We're fanning out even more. We get the trine, which is Jupiterian in its character. You see, and these are the Jupiter signs. So it's all very logical. All very logical. Mercury is in a bad spot. He's in a disadvantageous place in relation to the sign that he rules. And for this reason, I expect there to be some problems in the employment history. Also,
there is a theory that Joel Rifkin is responsible for some of the murders, and he had he always seemed to have work, but he was a bit of a jack of all trades. He seemed to skip from one thing to another.
Yeah, I'm not like him.
He's been in prison for some time. I don't feel that he's. I mean, it may be that one or two of the older crimes he's responsible for, but I don't feel that he's the primary problem.
So far, the earliest date we have for this is 1996. Now, for sure, it is quite possible that the killing started before then, that this dude started his career before then, but a pair of legs, a lower torso, essentially, washed up on the shores of Fire Island in 1996, and cops were like, oh, we have here a lower torso. I wonder who it could belong to. And no one knew. We didn't find that out until 2011, where we found the skeletal remains of the upper torso disposed on Gilgo Beach or one of the outlying areas surrounding there. So that tells us that this dude's been operative since 1996. I can't remember when Rifkin went to jail. I want to say Rifkin was in the late 90s, perhaps early 2000s, doing his, dancing his little jig through New York City. But a lot of these offenses, for the Long Island serial killer, for this unsub, a lot of these offenses are quite modern. They would have been committed after Rifkin had been sentenced and incarcerated. And also the dump behavior doesn't, the post-murder behavior doesn't really seem to fit with Rifkin. Although both murderers are quite comfortable keeping the corpses close to them for some time. Nevertheless, Rifkin, I don't think, had this obsession with dumping near water. Rifkin, all he did, murder prostitutes, those were his victims. However, I don't think Rifkin drove so far, quite as far. He did drive into Jersey, but, this might sound crazy. Jersey is actually closer to certain parts of New York City than other parts of New York City are. You know what I mean? Jersey's closer a lot of times than Long Island under certain circumstances. So, I don't know. Long and short of it is I'm not really in love with the idea of Rifkin being our unsub for these Long Island murders. Whoever the guy is, again, I would expect him to be kind of religious, and he would be, I would expect maybe a family guy. Maybe he's still even married. So, as we've said, and, will he ever be caught? Well, unfortunately, the 10th house indicates the police too. You know what I mean? And the police, all that's wrong with the 10th house in terms of career, the same faults hold true for the police. Mercury's combust. Mercury's an aversion to midheaven. Mercury.
The thought of somebody getting away with this is just awful.
It is awful, and just as in the McStay chart, also in this chart we have an approaching square of Jupiter and Saturn, and again, Jupiter is universal significator of the law. That always could mean something, and Jupiter as the ascendant ruler squaring Saturn and Mars, I'm thinking is going to represent this guy coming out of retirement, because I also believe he's aging. You see, I believe he's going to be dealing with some natural virility issues. However, because of the nature of his mental illnesses, his sexual illnesses, these sorts of things have to, and they actually enhance the virility. This is the addictive factor for men. This is what's very important. You know, we would be totally off the mark if we didn't think that the despicable acts offered something attractive to the guy. You know what I mean? They feel good to him. Now, you know, the general reaction is to say, I don't understand how it could feel good to him, but, you know, the rewiring of his eroticism, his pathological sexuality makes it so that all of this benzing murder, everything is pleasurable to him. The choosing of the victim, the commissioning of the crime, and the dumping of the body after he's kept it as a plaything for however long he wants it. You know, this is going to cause him to not really be able to stop. Old age isn't going to slow him down. I mean, it's not going to stop him, let's say. It will slow him down. It won't stop him. He'll just get wiser, craftier. You know, and the older he gets, the less suspicious he'll get too. You know, Albert Fish was, Jesus Christ, he was what, in the 70s and his 80s? I mean, you guys ought to check him out. My God, I would love to look at his nativity. You know, he went to the doctor complaining of a bellyache, and, you know, they did an X-ray. Come to find out he's got like 1,000 nails in his stomach that he swallowed. He was a masochist and a sadist. Spank him or he spanks you, he doesn't really care. Either way, it's fine with him. He was also a pedophile and a cannibal. So,
well, is his nativity not available?
I'm sorry?
Is his nativity not, he looks for it. Is his nativity not available?
No, I don't think I've mustered up the required spiritual courage to expose myself to such a tissue of destruction as his nativity. But certainly, from the perspective of judging mental disease and for judging things like masochism and sadism, a nativity like Albert Fish's is useful. But again,
it would be interesting to look at Shipman. Have you heard of Harold Shipman, the British doctor?
Yeah, the doctor.
He killed 345 of his patients.
Yeah, with him I would expect a completely different astrological signature with him because he's more of an intellectual serial killer. You know, the eroticism is much, much more abstract, and it's much more intellectualized. Jeffrey Dahmer is sort of the more visceral end of this type of serial killer, astrologically speaking. In Harold Shipman's chart, I would probably expect also to see an emphasis on the mutable signs, but this time with Sagittarius and Gemini. I would expect to see a dysfunctional Gemini. And obviously the moon would have to be thoroughly debauched and corrupted. You know, absolutely no nurturing impulse whatsoever in this man. Yeah, I've heard of Howard. I've heard of Shipman. Yeah, it's the medical serial killers that are the scariest. The so-called angels of death. You know, the homicidal nurses who slip you some succinylcholine or what have you. You know, the doctors. These are the ones that scare us.
Albert Fish's nativity is available. Do you want to take a look at him?
Yeah, sure. Is there a birth time on that rascal?
Yes, there is. He's
wow.
19th of May, 1870.
He's a Taurus.
Let's have a look. Albert Fish, 19th of May, 1870. And he was really hideous. 2:34 a.m.
Hold on. 19th of May or the 18th?
19th of May, 1870.
Sorry, I'm an old man. Okay, and what time, sir?
2:34 a.m.
And the place?
Does not say the place. Let me just check.
Wikipedia. It's probably someplace.
Here we go. Let me see.
Let me just Wikipedia it.
Yeah,
we could do a whole show on this guy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Here we
go,
Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Would you believe it? We've got a mugshot here of him wearing his little bowler hat with his little punk-ass mustache. You know, looks like a little devious turd.
Horrid. Man, let's see here. Let's have a look at his chart then, because this one's going to be interesting.
I'm glad that we have houses for this thing. I'm casting it now.
Let's see here. Oh, moon in Capricorn, exact, right on top of the south node.
Yeah, I see that. Moon is at fault. Moon is in detriment in Capricorn, so the moon is definitely corrupted with this guy.
The south node is not good.
Now here we have also another fiery rising sign.
Yeah.
You know, this is not at all uncommon. And to have Venus in Aries, this is also a serial killer signature. I've seen it in the chart, for example, of Wayne Williams, the Atlanta child murderer. And because of Venus is symbolizing youth, you know, Mercury and Venus are the universal significators for young boys, young girls, etc. Venus in Aries is a little girl who's receiving the force of Mars. Mars is in aversion to that Venus in Aries as well. Makes it even worse. And the crime he's famous for is for abducting a little girl, killing her, and cannibalizing her.
You've got his moon is opposing Uranus and squaring Neptune, trining Pluto. So it's a pretty rough picture, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And his Mercury's only aspect is sextile at Neptune in Aries in his first house.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, Jupiter is ruling the 12th house, and Jupiter is in the sign of his detriment as well. You know, so we have 3 planets that are functionally disabled. The sun is peregrine, meaning that his sun is his authority, his power, his force in the world. All of that is completely wandering and unfocused toward any one thing. And the moon is accidentally malefic. Venus is accidentally malefic. Jupiter is accidentally malefic. So not only do we have an excess of evil, we have a nullification of the good. So this guy wouldn't have had a good angel, bad angel. He would have just had a hugely obese bad angel. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The benefics are completely nullified here.
We've also noticed that his Mercury was at extreme declination when he was born. And I noticed that in another chart the other day, a chart of a serial killer.
Yeah.
Because when a planet gets to such extreme declination, it starts to really lose control of itself, lose control of what it's supposed to be. But I tell you what, this is an intelligent man. This is a man that's smart. His Mercury is at 17 degrees Gemini. Isn't that the degree of exaltation, or is it 15 degrees Gemini? It's very close.
Mercury is going to be exalted throughout the entire sign. He doesn't quite have he has an exaltation degree in Virgo, but he's not exalted in Gemini, actually. His rulership.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Yeah, I was thinking of Virgo. It's 15 degrees Virgo, isn't it? I think it's 15. Okay, yeah, that's true.
Believe it or not, the North Node is exalted in Gemini, but I've never seen that practically applied anywhere. South Node is exalted in Sagittarius, by the way.
I know, and I've got mine the other way around. There's plenty to spin it around.
Well, Venus squares the moon, and the signs involved. This is definitely going to be bringing in the sadomasochism. You know, especially having, excuse me, the moon in the sign of her detriment, not in aspect to her ruler. The situation would have been mollified somewhat if Saturn were enshrined to the moon in Capricorn, or even in opposition, because then they would have reception. You know, that would even be much, much, much better. But for Saturn not to have any aspect at all to the moon, this is bad. You know, plus the moon in Capricorn, you know, squaring Venus. He's going to be inflamed. He's going to be attracted to young girls.
And young boys.
Yeah, Venus is angular in Aries too, in the first house, almost conjunct the ascendant. It's Mars.
Also, Stephen, is Neptune's in the bends. Neptune and Aries in the first house in the bends.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Look, the ascendant ruler does not aspect the ascendant. That's also very, very bad. It's also sort of marking this chart as generally unfortunate. To have the ascendant ruler not aspect the rising degree, that's terrible. In the horary chart, at least we had Jupiter trining the rising degree in Sagittarius. We don't have that here, And as a consequence, Albert Fish, he did get caught, and I want to say he was electrocuted. He was definitely electrocuted. And so, generally unfortunate. Now, the sun and the moon, they do have a trine, and I think this is sort of factors into that intelligence that you mentioned. He was very intelligent. He was able to con his victims' parents into letting the child go with him to a birthday party, and he took her to an abandoned house and committed his offenses and went on about his merry way. So he was able to con the parents. Of course, this was in a day when stranger danger was not as prominently, it wasn't as a big of a deal back then as it is today, And then Albert Fish had the nerve to write a letter, okay, and this is evidence of this terrible third house. This is Jupiter in detriment to the third house. Albert Fish had the nerve to write a letter to his victim's parents. And I'm looking at whole sign houses, by the way. I should actually note it, or said that. He wrote a letter to his victim's parents telling them what she tasted like, telling them what dishes he made out of her. Despicable man. This is his sadistic impulses at play. But again, he was equally happy when someone would drive the knife and twist it into him as well. He was a masochist in addition to being a sadist. He was remarkably egalitarian when it came to his kink. And this in the roaring 20s. You know what I'm saying? This is what makes it really stand out for me. We don't expect sexual deviance of this magnitude until we get at least into the 70s. You know what I mean? This is completely modern. It's kind of modern.
It makes you wonder about all of... You think now law enforcement's pretty sophisticated. And it's pretty difficult for most people to get away with this kind of thing for long. But in the past, you really think to yourself, well, what must have gone on that was never actually discovered? And I'm not referring to this chap, Albert Fish. Just thinking generally out there in society, there must have been a lot that went on out there that was never identified by authorities.
Yeah, Albert Fish certainly was, the police of his day were not equipped to deal with Albert Fish. That much is for certain. He was beyond the police. The magnitude of his offenses were beyond the police. And also, the profundity of his criminal genius was also beyond the police. This guy, with some of his important Arabic lots, such as the part of faith, which is also known as the part of spirit, which is it's formulated in the reverse way you would formulate the part of fortune. But his part of spirit is in a fiery sign, Sagittarius. The part of spirit in that fiery. Sagittarius is, spiritually kind of a step in the wrong direction. It's in the 8th house as well, close to the 9th house gods. But all of his Arabic parts, the ones that pertain again to the things that he valued in life and his spiritual characteristics, all of them are corrupt. And wow, seriously.
I always think that it's interesting to visualize how the energy moves through the charts. And when you do that with his chart, you start by saying, well, his ascendant, this is Fish. when you say his ascendant is in Aries,
right.
therefore ruled by Mars. So you imagine the energy flowing from the ascendant to the Mars, which is in the first house, and it's in Taurus, so it's flowing through Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus, so it flows through to Venus, but that Venus is conjunct the ascendant. It's in the first house as well. And then because that Venus is in Aries, it would continue flowing through the ascendant, flowing through Mars. It's almost like a cycle of energy that's just unending there between the ascendant, Mars in Taurus in the first house, Venus in Aries in the first house, through to the ascendant, through to Mars, to Venus. It's just sort of like an energy track there in the first house, surrounding that Neptune in his first house, which squares his moon and his nodes. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's like the energy sort of just cycling, and stuck there within the first house.
Yeah, sure. I know exactly what you're talking about. This is a very good observation, in fact, because this natal chart is describing a very definite flow of energy. You might almost look at it as discrete circuits of energy. So whenever he has an ascendant experience, an experience dealing with using his skill, which for him is geared more towards the bad than the good. But in any case where he has to use his ascendant, this is going to trigger that natal Venus in Aries, which is going to trigger its dispositor, Mars, in the second house. So, now all of a sudden we see where the energy flow leads to. It leads to the second house. So this is going to be somebody who's going to try to get your money. This guy lives for money. He lives for it. And his ascendant ruler is in the second house. He's going to go for money. And that's how he's going to be able to feel like he's powerful. He's going to need that Aries feeling. And again, this is somebody who's going to take a lot of initiative, not a passive person in the slightest. You see, because Aries is going to go out to get the things that it wants. It's not going to wait for the things that it wants to come to it. It's going to go out and get them. And with Venus in the ascendant, he would have been able to have wooed and seduced a lot of people. And when I say seduced, I mean to get whatever it is he wanted out of them, whether it be just, tolerate him on the bus or the, public transportation and not notice him, or whether it be to, give him a newspaper for free, or whether it be to, accompany him down a dark alley. Venus in Aries would have helped him. And the Venus in Aries is the primary symbol of his sadism, because quite literally it's saying, I love blood. Aries is blood. Venus is love. And it's right there in the ascendant. When you're looking at this chart, this is a created predator. Someone, he's no accident. The Albert Fishes of the world are not theological or philosophical accidents. They're just as purposeful. They're just as on purpose as you and I are. Would Albert Fish have been able to have chosen a different path? My gut reaction to that is heck to the no. He would not have, with Venus angular and in Aries like that. That Venus is going to do what it says it's going to do. Which is going to be second house things. Because Venus,
his part of passion is in the 12th house, ruled by that Neptune and Aries in the first. I agree with you. I don't think there was a different path for this guy.
Yeah,
he's just completely insane.
He was created, I think, in the same spirit that, a mosquito or a great white shark was created, but however, at least the great white shark has the benefit of, just running on pure instinct. Albert Fish made his offenses even worse because he injected an element of intellectualism into them. He was a smart guy. He could have chosen, I don't know if he could have chosen anything. Again, he was operating under compelling forces that would have been irresistible, and there was nothing to oppose those compelling forces. All of the goodness in this chart has been nullified.
Well, I understand. My understanding also is that any planet that is at the same degree as the nodes is potentially catastrophic.
Right.
And when you look at his chart, it's quite fascinating because the nodal axis is very karmic. It really describes where you've come from, where you're going to spiritually. And in his case, we've got that frosty, cold moon in Capricorn at 22 degrees. So not only is it at the degree of the nodes, it's actually conjunct the south node, so it's just completely hollowed out. And not only that, but because the north node is in Cancer, it's actually that frosty moon at the south node at 22 degrees that rules the north node and that rules Uranus, which is conjunct the north node. So this guy is just off the chart, insane, no way out. Because if you look at that, the cycle of the energy in effect through his nodal axis, it's this moon, cold moon, conjunct the south node, ruling the north node, back to the south node, involving Saturn. It's just nasty, really nasty.
Yeah, it certainly is nasty. The moon in Capricorn is, going to be cold, and it's going to be drying out too. Capricorn is going to dry out the moon. Any emotions that moon may have conveyed, those are going to be rendered more rigid, more unbending and inflexible. There's going to be a lack of flexibility. There's going to be a tensioning because of the dryness of Capricorn. It's going to cause the moon to be tense. Now, the node, the conjunction with the south node, might actually reduce the negative aspect to a functional degree so that Albert Fish can do things like keep a job and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And at the same token, it's going to create a public record as well, so that Albert would have amassed an arrest, what do they call them, a rap sheet with a lot of probably really scuzzy and yet, not punishable by long prison sentences types of crimes like child molestation, things of that nature. Back in those days, early 1900s, improprieties with a child may get you, 30 days in jail or something, or might get you serious. I don't know what the penalties were, but, I'm thinking that moon conjunct south node is going to give this guy kind of a lengthy rap sheet of rather petty types of sexual crime. And certainly the square from Venus is going to worsen things. Absolutely. Jupiter is going to promise prison and make it happen for him, and indeed it does happen. However, the guy spent most of his life free, He didn't spend most of his life in jail. I think that Jupiter's relative weakness in the chart, by being in the sign of his detriment, by being succeeding but leaning more toward cadency, I think these factors make prison inevitable yet late coming for Albert Fish, like permanent prison. But again, Pisces is mutable, so he probably would have been in jail, multiple times. We'd be quite justified in forecasting this for this individual if his mother came to us with this chart. We'd probably also be quite justified in advising the poor lady to wrap the infant up in a burlap sack and toss it over a bridge. No, that's terrible. But yeah. Albert Fish, certainly the biggest tragedy in his life is that he was ever born at all. He's a horrible human being, an absolutely despicable human being. What he did to his victim does not merit repetition on this show. And then to turn around and have the nerve to write a letter to the parents, upsetting them the way that he did, man, that's just pure wickedness. I mean, that goes beyond the pale as far as villainy is concerned. A weird guy, just a weirdo, but a fascinating personage. Quite appropriate to talk about him as we're getting close to Halloween here.
Absolutely. Yeah, the day before.
We must be actually getting close to the end of our show.
We are, but we've covered a lot. It's been a very interesting show.
I kind of lost myself, Steve. I should probably mention that you can find Stephen Frampton at stephenframpton.com. That's Stephen with a V. And you can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. Definitely come check us out. Also, hear us on Thursday nights at psychicaccesstalkradio.com, which is a lovely show covering a lot of paranormal topics. And I guess we're about to wrap up. Steve, would you like to add anything?
Just that was very fitting for Halloween. Let's call that our Halloween freak show.
Yeah, we're actually going to be investigating a haunted hotel next week, the Shanley Hotel, an event hosted by my friend and colleague Mary Gasparo. She's also a psychic, and she is very interested in this hotel, and I'm excited about checking this place out. Steve, I wish we could have had a little bit of time to have mentioned the specifics of that hotel, the Shanley Hotel. It's a very interesting place.
Yes, it certainly sounds like an interesting place to visit. I would like to visit it someday.
Well, I'd like also to thank everybody listening at home, and we will go ahead and wrap things up now. Hope everybody has a wonderful week. Sayonara.